Hi guys, Drew from Aloha Plant Life here, and today I'm sitting here surrounded by some of my favorite houseplants that are perfect for those of you who are chronic underwaterers or might just have a slight tendency towards underwatering your plants. Much like Pearl, who you saw at the intro of this video, all of these plants I'm going to be showing you today like to either completely dry out or almost dry out all the way in between waterings, which means less frequent waterings for you. Now, before we get into all these plants, there is a few key factors that I want you guys to keep in mind when it comes to how quickly it's going to take your houseplants to dry out between waterings. First, the size of the pot. The bigger the pot is, the longer it's going to take to dry out. There's just more soil, more water involved, and it's just science. It's going to take longer for that to dry out than a tiny little pot like this. The other thing is location. If you have it in the right location and it's using up its energy efficiently and to the level that it really should be, then it's going to dry out more quickly. So we always want to make sure we have our plants in the proper location, but just keep in mind, especially those full sun ones that you have sitting in a southern facing window are typically going to dry out a little bit faster than ones that are further back or in like an east facing window or a west facing window. So with that said, let's just go ahead and head right into these plants. I am going to start out, well, first of all, they are all easy care plants, super easy to care for, all these plants I'm going to show you today, but I am going to start out with the ones that I feel like are the easiest of the easy first, and then we're going to work our way towards the ones that are maybe a little bit less easy than these first ones. This entire first grouping of plants that we're going to talk about are succulents, and succulents are great for people who are looking for a small, compact type plant. They're also great if you live in a dry, arid environment because they do not require any kind of high humidity at all. They actually typically prefer it on the drier side. And they also are great for if you're looking for a plant to put in a very, very bright, sunny location, like directly in a southern facing window, because they want as much light as they can get. Now, some varieties, maybe more so than others, but they're all going to want pretty bright locations in your house. Now, I have pulled a few out here. This is my Echeveria, which I featured in a recent propagation video. And this was the original plant is in this pot, and I had cut off the head of it to propagate it. And now it's been growing back its new growth on its original stem. So you can see there, it's just a compact little plant, little rosette type form, and it'll eventually get bigger and wider, but it's not going to get much taller. Now, eventually over time, succulents, even if you have them in a southern facing window with tons of bright light, in my experience, unless you have them outside in direct bright light, they are going to start to get a little bit leggy. And when that happens, that's the perfect time to propagate them. And like I said, I have a video on that and I will link it in the description down below for you. But they are otherwise going to stay pretty tight and compact. These plants definitely want to dry all the way out in between waterings. And then I wait until, and I check the leaves, I look at the leaves. If they start to feel, I give them a little squishy with my fingers, just a little pinch, and if they feel squishy at all, then that is when I will finally go in and water them. Typically, once every 30 days for this size plant. This plant might have been, probably been going a little bit longer on this one just because it has been growing its growth back from being propagated, so it hasn't had as much foliage to have to push that water to. But in general, it's going to be about once a month. And that's perfect for those of you who have a tendency not to water your plants often enough. So let's talk about soil requirements, because soil for your succulents is very, very important to make sure that you don't actually accidentally overwater your plant. So the plant really, really wants to have well-draining soil because it does not want to be sitting in water ever. So I use Bonsai Jack's Gritty Mix, which I will link in the description down below for you. And that is all I put these succulents in. I did mention in the previous video on how to water your plants that with well-draining soil like this, lots of times the water will just run straight through the soil and out of the bottom of the plant. In that situation, bottom watering is typically a better situation because that way your plant actually has time to soak up the water it needs. And then you can just take it out of the water, it drains the excess water out, and you're good to go for another month. So that's the Echeveria. On the same plane and the same family of plants, of succulents, which is not the scientific name, but you know what I mean. So this is a Haworthia. I don't know why I just took her out of her cover pot. Rude of me, so sorry. This is a Haworthia. I can never say the scientific name right, you guys. Haworthia Scindapsus, I think is the scientific name, but everybody calls them Haworthias, okay? So we're just gonna roll with that today. And this particular variety is often referred to as a zebra plant because, as you can see, it has these little white bumps. They're actually little dots, but they're close enough together that it makes it look like it's kind of striped. Now, I don't typically refer to this as a zebra plant. So if I talk about a zebra plant in any of the videos that I'm showing, that you're watching, and I'm not showing you a plant, this is not the plant I'm talking about. I'm talking about a completely different plant, which you'll get to see when I get around to doing my bedroom plant tour so that you can know what I'm talking about. But this I will always call a Haworthia. Now, this one is a little bit different in characteristic, as you can see from the Echeveria. So you're going to get taller leaves with this. It almost kind of reminds me close to an aloe vera, sort of kind of. Aloe vera's leaves will start to kind of curve over off of the side of the pots, but aloe vera is another great plant as well for any of you who are chronic underwaterers. But you can see it's just a bunch of little leaves growing together here, and it will get taller, but it's not going to get super tall, maybe to about here. So once again, it's a great little compact plant for you to have in your home if that's what you're looking for. But the nice thing about this compared to this is that you're going to get a little bit of that height. So there's a little more structural element to it. Now, if you can't see, this is one type of succulent that reproduces via what is called pups. Yes, pups, like a dog. If you can see, right here is a little baby, separate plant. So this is called clonal offsets. And basically, these are emerging from the root and base stem of the plant underneath the soil. And they pop up. And when they do that, you want to let them grow into like juvenile plants, right? But once they get old enough, you can actually separate them from the mother plant, and then you have more little Haworthias. So that's kind of a fun little thing, and it just happens naturally. So you're always going to get more plants out of this. And the nice thing is, you know, eventually, if mom dies of old age, because we always hope our plants only ever die of old age, you will already have her children that you can then keep enjoying. So that is the Haworthia, and same soil kind of requirements here. You want well-draining soil, like that Bonsai Jack's gritty mix. This plant is typically, you can try it in a southern facing window, and don't forget, you guys, you always want to acclimate your plants, slowly move them into brighter locations when you bring them into your house, because in greenhouses, they typically have a shade cover, so they're not used to being in that super bright direct light. So always slowly move them in and keep an eye on how they're reacting. This one does okay in my southern facing windows in my living room downstairs. Typically though, these are more prone to burn on their leaves than say this guy over here. So you definitely want to keep an eye out for that. It is a darker leafed plant, so typically darker leaf plants like this can come back from those bright windows a little ways and still be happy. So I actually moved her from living directly in that window onto a shelf that's a few feet away from it, and she still absolutely loves it there and is doing just fine. But you do not want to put any of these succulents in a low light situation. They're not going to be happy with you, and they are going to get extremely leggy extremely fast. Once again, with humidity on this plant, it likes dry, so you don't need to worry about if your house is super humid or not. And as far as growth rate goes, you guys, most succulents are typically pretty slow growing, especially once they kind of reach that maturity size. So even this plant that I had propagated, it's been maybe 3 months, 4 months now since I cut it off, and it's only come back about half of the size that it was before. And that's actually growing pretty quickly in the scheme of things, but once it gets to the size of the diameter of this pot, it's going to slow down. It's not going to keep, you know, growing huger and huger and huger and huger or anything like that. So when you do propagate them, they come back pretty quickly. But in general, when you buy it as a already established plant, these are not going to grow super duper fast. So you're going to be able to leave them in those positions where you have them in your house for a long, long time. Now, another nice thing about succulents is that they don't have to be repotted very often. They can go for years and years in the same pot. Typically, when you repot them, you are also maybe not going to even move them up into a bigger pot. It really just depends. If they're root bound, then yes, you want to move them up, but you don't want to go too big, like one size bigger on that pot for root bound succulents. But if they're not root bound, sometimes you just need to give them a soil refresh. And in that situation, you're just going to give new soil in the exact same pot. But typically, I mean, I've had this one for 2 years and I have never repotted it, and it's doing fine. And I don't have any indication that it's going to need to be repotted, or I would repot it. And if you're wondering about how you know if your plant needs to be repotted or not, I will put a link in the description for this video to my repotting video, because we discussed how to know when you need to repot in that video. So these are the first two succulents. Let me put them back aside. Now this next plant is a Senecio, a type of Senecio more commonly called string of pearls. Hence why I call her Pearl, because she's got these beautiful trailing pearls. And if we're being honest, they look more like green peas. But you know, string of peas doesn't sound as luxurious and fun as string of pearls, right? Unless you're the green giant. So Pearl here is also a succulent type plant, but she's a trailing plant. So if you have a southern facing window and you want a trailing plant there, and a lot of the trailing plants that you're looking at all say they can't tolerate that level of light, this is an option to consider. Now, sometimes I have heard people have to keep string of pearls a little bit further back from the southern facing window versus being directly in the windowsill, but you can still put it in that general vicinity. She is about a foot back in my living room from my southern facing windows, and she is doing great. Obviously, she's a baby, but she will grow and continue to grow and get very, very long. I've actually seen full, like 6-inch pots just full and flowing over, but she was just too cute as a baby for me to pass up. So that's why I bought her as that baby. But this is all new growth here. She had nothing trailing over when I got her. I believe it was back in November, and now there's just a ton there. Now, always make sure in general that you're rotating your plants when you do water them. And sometimes with these types of plants, I would just try to think about like rotating them maybe once every few weeks, because if you don't, you're going to end up with all the growth on one side and not the other. So I've actually got this side of her facing the window right now, trying to promote some of that growth. But in general, they will continue to grow all around. And even if you don't have it growing on one side, that's fine. I mean, you just keep that side against the wall and nobody's going to know, right? But she is absolutely, I just love her. I love all of my Senecios, if I'm being honest with you guys. I mean, I love all of my plants in general, but the Senecios are just kind of very unique. So I also have a string of bananas, which you might have seen in my living room tour video. And that is also a type of Senecio, just like Pearl, except that instead of having these little beads, the string of bananas has what look like bananas. They're shaped like bananas. There's also a string of dolphins, which looks like a little jumping dolphin each of the leaves. So there's lots of different Senecios that you could look into that are trailing plants if you're looking for a trailing plant. And the Senecios grow fast. They grow fast. My string of bananas especially has grown really, really fast. So unlike the other succulents that we've talked about, these are very, very fast growing, but they also just want to get completely dried out in between. And same thing, when she looks dry, and she's in a nursery pot in this little cover pot, and what I'll do is I can tell right now, I actually know because I was checking her when I was grabbing her for this video, that she needs to be watered after this video. So she is completely dried out. I can see on top that the soil looks dry. I can see through the drainage holes on the bottom that the soil looks dry. And then I gave one of her pearls just a little itty bitty squish, and it is a little bit squishy. And then on some of her pearls, I can see where they're starting to kind of shrink and have that puckering look to them, kind of like they're starting to turn into like a raisin. That's your good sign that now it is time to give her water. And I do bottom water her. I just set her in the water, let it soak up. And once she has stopped soaking the water up and I don't see that water level going down in the bowl that I've set her in, I take her out, I let her drain out, and I put her back in her little pot and back on her shelf in the living room. Once again, super well draining soil is important here. And humidity is not a big concern for Senecios either. So absolutely love Senecios. We're gonna go ahead and set Pearl aside here. Also, you guys just know there are a ton of varieties of succulents out there, all of which will fall into the same category of plants and care requirements that are great if you're a person who tends to underwater. So I'm just giving you a small sampling today because we would be here for hours and hours and hours if I didn't. So we're going to move on to the next grouping of plants, and I want to talk about, let's talk about our Hoyas next. So Hoyas are a little bit of a different breed of plant, but we're kind of also going from, I just realized without intending to do so, we're going from the thicker, plumper, holding more water type foliage plants into, at the end of this video, the thinner leafed plants like this plant. So in between there are Hoyas, and Hoyas are also known as wax leaf plants because of those leaves being that thicker and waxy-ish texture. And there are also thousands upon thousands of varieties of Hoyas. Now, obviously, not all of them are available as houseplants, but there are a ton that are available as houseplants. So there are so many different shapes, textures. It's just, there's so many, and a lot of people are not attracted to Hoyas. I am one of those people who, in the beginning, I was not very attracted to Hoyas until I found the type of Hoyas that I actually am attracted to. So I'm going to be showing you the ones I have, but there are different ones with different shaped leaves out there and different colorings and patterning. So if you are not particularly attracted to the two I'm going to show you here today, then be sure to go look up some other Hoyas that are available as houseplants, because I guarantee you'll be able to find at least one that you're attracted to. So we have my Hoya curtisii here. So this is another great example of a vining plant. Cute little, almost heartish shaped leaves. There is that little bit of variegation on there. It's kind of a silverish variegation, and these woody stems. And you can see all of that bright green new growth coming in there. That's what it looks like when the new growth is coming in. And for this one, this particular Hoya has been very fast growing for me. It is one of my newer Hoyas, newer plants. I got it back in January, and it's just been putting out all of this new growth that you saw. And I gave it its first fertilizing the other day, and it has started putting out even more rapid new growth now. And that is one thing that I didn't mention with the succulents. Succulents don't typically need to be fertilized quite as often as your other houseplants. I think I fertilize them maybe once every like 4 months, so once a quarter. And I do make sure though that I give them a good fertilizer at the start of the growing season, so in the spring, just to get them kicked off correctly. So Hoyas though, like other houseplants, are typically going to want to be fertilized a little bit more often. I'd say probably I do this once a month fertilizing. And sometimes I might do more, it just depends. I'll do a whole nother video for you guys on fertilizing and kind of understanding when you need to fertilize, based on the look of your plant and any signs and symptoms you might be seeing of nutrient deficiencies. But typically once a month is what I do. And this plant, so all Hoyas that vine like this or trail, you don't have to leave them as trailing plants, but if you want a trailing plant that is perfect for your underwater tendencies, this is another good example. Now, you can actually train Hoyas to climb up trellises or loops. A lot of the crimson princesses that I've seen, people will put a metal loop in the pot and they will train it to grow up and around in a circle. So you can get really sculptural with Hoyas. I've seen all kinds of cool little configurations. So if you like the look of this plant, but you don't want something that trails, it is possible for you to train it to grow up. Now this variety, because it has such tiny little leaves and so many stems, trying to get it, I mean, it will go up. It will go up if you try to train it to go up, but it might be a little bit more difficult to get it into kind of a sculptural look that you want just because of the nature of the size of the leaves and everything. But definitely wants to dry out completely between waterings, and then it wants a really good soak through. You definitely want a well-draining soil, but you want it to be more soil-based than your succulents. So that Jack's Gritty mix is hardly any soil. It's mostly rocks, bark, things that are chunky like that. So for these, you want a very well-draining premium potting mix mixed in with a good amount of something like pumice, perlite, Sometimes I even mix it with a little bit of the Jack's Gritty mix so that it's going to drain well. But when you do water them, you want them completely wet down very, very well. And then you're just going to set it aside, and in about a month or so, you're going to check on them again. Now, once again, this one's a little bit smaller and it's pumping out new growth crazy fast. So I think I've probably been going about 2.5 weeks between waterings right now. But if it was a bigger plant, definitely it would be taking more like a month between waterings. And these leaves also, once it dries out, eventually these leaves will start to get not squishy like these because they're not as plump, but they're really firm leaves. So if you can see, I'm trying to bend it and I can't bend it. But once it is dried out, those leaves will slowly get more pliable and you can try and kind of fold them up like a taco. And if they are starting to be able to be bended like that, or bent like that, then you know that it's definitely time to water. And once again, these plants like a ton of bright light, and especially up on the surface. And that's one thing that I should have mentioned when we were talking about pearl. When you have vining plants like this, you'll see a lot of people, they'll have vining plants and they're like totally bald on the surface. Typically that's because you're not getting enough light on the surface of the top of the plant, on the crown of its head as it were. So you want to make sure that it is getting that bright light here. And you could do a southern facing window with these plants as well. Most of them will tolerate, this one will tolerate direct light to an extent. Just always, like I said, acclimate your plants, keep an eye on them, make sure it doesn't look like the leaves are getting burned. This plant actually, if it gets a little bit stressed, the undersides of the leaves will turn a little bit red. So that's normal, but that's also a good sign to kind of look out for if it's not getting the right lighting requirements. So that's the Hoya curtisii. And as far as humidity goes with Hoyas, you guys, it kind of depends. I feel like they want a little bit more humidity than say a succulent would. Like they don't want it to be totally dry, but this particular variety and the next one I'm going to show you, they're fine with my humidity in my house, which even in the winter, and in the winter we're around like 30% humidity. There is another type of Hoya, the Hoya linearis. I find that the linearis wants a little bit more humidity than say maybe 30%, but it's a very, very fine leafed Hoya and the leaves are nowhere near as thick and stiff as these leaves. So I think that definitely plays a role in it. But these, the curtisii and the next one I'm going to show you, they will be fine in pretty much any type of humidity you have in your house, as long as it's not just, you know, like 0% humidity. I don't know if any plant really wants 0% humidity. Well, the next one we're going to look at, and so I picked these two because I just wanted to give you a good idea of the drastic differences in styles of foliage amongst Hoya, like I was talking about earlier. So this is a wayetii, and it is a variegated one. Once again, I don't know why I keep taking them out of their pants to try to show you, just because they're in a cover pot. So you can see these are long, slender leaves, and they are definitely it's definitely a very different looking plant to what we just looked at, but it's still a Hoya. And when I say variegated, where the variegation happens in this plant is you get that deep green along the edges here. You get that lighter kind of yellow, sometimes it's almost creamish color in the middle, and then sometimes you get a little bit of pink, like you can see down here. And as this plant gets older and more mature, this is a very young plant, and grows more of that pinkish color will start to come in. Also, with all variegated plants, always make sure they're getting enough light. If you don't give your variegated plants enough light, they'll start to lose their variegation. So if you see that it's turning more green, that's a good sign that maybe you need to get it somewhere where it's getting some more light. But definitely still wants a lot of bright light. You want to make sure you're getting it on the surface of that plant. So far in my experience with this plant, it is a slower grower than the curtisii. It has not really been putting out much new growth at all. We'll see how much it picks up now that we're heading into spring. But sometimes some Hoyas are just slower growers than others. And if you want a plant that you can keep in that spot and not have to worry about it outgrowing the space that you want to keep it in too quickly, that can be a good thing for you. So with the wayetii, the leaves are also very thick and not very pliable. So once again, once you let it dry out completely between waterings, you can test those leaves and feel if the firmness is changing or not to know if it's time to rewater again. Just please keep in mind, you guys, that all new growth on any plant that comes in is going to be softer and more pliable than the older leaves. So always make sure you're checking those older leaves and not misreading by checking the newer leaves. So there are other varieties if you like this kind of long-leafed Hoya look. There's also the string bean Hoya, which I actually think is a Kintiana, I think is what it is. And there is a variegated version of that. So there are a lot of options in this thinner leaf variety. There's also leaves that are more of an oval shape that are about maybe this big by this big. That's your Crimson Queen, your Crimson Princess. So many types of Hoyas, you guys. And then there are some other kind of crazy wrinkly compacted types, such as a Hoya Hindu rope. So there's just so many varieties and styles of foliage. You can definitely find a Hoya that's good for you. And it's very simple to care for. So another thing with Hoyas is similar to succulents, they don't need to be repotted very often, probably even less often than your succulents, and they like to be root bound. So just don't worry about it unless you see those signs of it needing to be repotted. Then you can look into repotting it, but it may be years and years and years before you have to repot your Hoyas. So the next group of plants that I want to move on to, I think, well, we have two more groupings of plants to get through, but both of these are commonly referred to as pothos. So if you hear anybody talk about a pothos or you see pothos written on a name card for a plant, all of these get commonly called pothos, even though none of them are actually in the pothos genus. So we are going to talk about the ones that are scientifically called Epipremnums first. Epipremnum pinnatums, and I'm trying to decide who I want to start with. Let's start with the little one that is up here because Big Mama over here is going to take a little bit more effort. I'm probably going to have to move some things off of the table here. So this is a variety is called Cebu blue. So you'll most commonly hear this referred to as a Cebu blue pothos. As you can see, it's got these kind of longer, elongated leaves that are this pretty green, but they kind of have a bluish hue to them, hence the name Cebu blue. There's also a similar variety that looks almost identical to this, but it's called a Baltic blue, and it's got a bit of a darker coloring to the leaves, but still with that kind of bluish cast. I actually think the Baltic has more bluish cast to it. So this is a vining plant. So once again, this is a plant that eventually will trail, or you can train it to go up a pole if you prefer. It's really just an aesthetic preference, you guys, as to whether you want to let it trail or if you want it to climb a pole. But still super easy to care for. Let it dry out. I do find that these, you want to catch them really quickly when they do dry out. You don't want to go too long after that soil is dry. Unlike the other plants where I was saying check the leaves and everything, once the soil is completely dry on a pothos in general, but definitely an Epipremnum, you're going to want to water. And you always want to keep your eye out, if you're a chronic underwaterer, for signs of underwatering stress in your plants, because as we learned in the underwater video, if you get to that critical dryness stage, then we potentially can't come back from that. So in my experience, I just let it get till the soil looks completely dry, and then I give it a really good water down. These plants can be in just kind of a regular potting mix. I do always add extra drainage to all of the potting soil I buy, just because I feel like better safe than sorry, right? But you don't need a ton of heavy drainage for any of these pothos that we're going to talk about. So I typically would do potting mix of 2/3 potting mix ratio to 1/3 of whatever my extra drainage is, which my pumice has finally arrived. So I am switching to using pumice for that extra drainage instead of perlite anymore, because the perlite likes to float to the surface and I need something that's going to stay down there where it's supposed to be and actually do its job. So we'll be using that pumice moving forward. These plants, in terms of humidity, they're going to want a little bit more of a humid environment than the other plants that we have talked about so far. So keep that in mind. I still find that they do okay. This one's been in my 30% humidity throughout the winter and has done fine. The growth has slowed down a little bit, but that's expected in the winter. So this one is also a low light tolerant plant, and it will prefer more bright light, but do not get this plant into direct light. These plants that we're moving into now do not want to be directly in your southern facing window. If you're gonna have a southern facing window, you're gonna need to pull them pretty far back from that southern facing window, but they still want a lot of bright light, just not direct. It needs to be indirect. As far as repotting goes for these plants, you're gonna need to check them I check mine once a year, and if they're looking okay and they aren't looking crazy root bound, or I'm not seeing any symptoms of it needing to be repotted, then I just put it off and I check it again in another year, depending on how it looked. So I would say about once every 2 to 3 years for all of these pothos type plants that we are going to be talking about in terms of when you need to repot. And you're always just going to want to go up that one pot size. So that is the Cebu blue. I'm going to set her down here. And I'm going to move some things because Big Mama over here, you're probably not going to be able to see my face while I talk about Big Mama because she's that big, but I love her. And this next one that I'm going to show you, it is still an Epipremnum pinnatum, but the variety is a marble queen, so more commonly known as a marble queen pothos. This is a much more common plant than the Cebu blue. You can find these almost anywhere, and they are not going to cost you a ton of money, and you can get one pretty much this size if you want to for not that expensive. Oh, she is heavy. Heavy, heavy, heavy. Okay, hello, beautiful. Let's get you turned around and closer so they can see those beautiful marble variegated leaves. So you can see called a marble queen because that variegation has kind of a marbling look to it. And that variegation is anywhere from a creamish color to a yellow color with the dark and light green in between. And this is actually a good plant for me to show you guys what I was talking about. If it's not getting, depending on how much light it's getting, the leaves will change. I had her in a north-facing window, so also low light tolerant, but remember that variegation, you might lose some of that in a lower light setting like that. But she was in a room that is directly north-facing, and she was directly in the window, and she was doing fine. She's been popping out a ton of new growth, and that was over last spring and summer. When winter hit and that lighting in the north got less, then she was kind of not growing as quickly, and I was starting to see some leaves that were staying more green. So you can see that one is definitely more green, less of that lighter coloring on it. So that is kind of what can happen if it's not getting enough light. Also, if you're not rotating your plants, the side that's not ever getting rotated to face the light will typically be less variegated or darker. I do try to rotate her every time I water her, which I water her like once a month. So this is a good example of what I was talking about earlier, where this is a bigger pot, a bigger plant. She's going to take a lot longer to dry out than the Cebu blue pothos is just a baby in a 4-inch pot that we were just looking at. That Cebu blue pothos, I think I water it right now. I think we're going about 2.5 weeks between waterings because it's in such a small pot. If it was in a pot like this and it was this big, it would be like this plant where it's at least a month before this gets dry enough for me to need to water it. But once again, beautiful trailing plant if you're looking for trailing plants, but you can train it to grow up a pole as well. So whatever aesthetically you're looking for. This mama is super fast growing. This is, I'm not sure, this pot might be, I think it's about an 8-inch pot. I bought her and she was in a 6-inch pot, and I've had her for, I think we're just 2 months shy of a year. And she has put out a ton of growth because there's no way she was this big in the 6-inch pot. So very, very fast growing, easy to propagate. So if you wanted to take a cutting and grow it to give to a friend, you can do that. And also same humidity requirements as the Cebu blue that we were talking about, same soil requirements, just regular soil with a little extra drainage, and she will be happy. Do not get her into direct sunlight. Bright indirect light is what she is going to want. And yeah, she is just beautiful and gorgeous, and I can't wait to see how much she grows this growing season. So I'm going to go ahead and set her down. You also don't have to repot, but once maybe every 1 to 2 to 3, maybe even years for that plant as well. And there are a ton more varieties of Epipremnums. I have several others, but once again, trying to cover all of them in this video would have taken forever, so we are not going to be doing that today. I am going to move on now to our last grouping of plants, which still commonly called pothos, but these are scientifically in the Scindapsus genus. So Epipremnums were these first two we looked at, and now we're going into the Scindapsus. And Scindapsus are some of my favorite vining plants. I don't even know which one I want to show you first. Let's let's go with this one. So this is a treubii. So there's kind of two main classifications when we're talking about Scindapsus. And so we have Scindapsus pictus, which is what I'm going to discuss over here in a second. And we have the treubiis. So this is a Moonlight treubii. This is another one of those plants that had been pretty rare, pretty hard to find, pretty pricey. Unfortunately, I say unfortunately, I'll explain why. Unfortunately, it is not quite the case anymore. They are popping up all over the place, especially at big box stores for insanely cheap. The problem is, the reason they're insanely cheap is typically it's unrooted cuttings that are being sold to you. So I'm planning, because I was highly frustrated about this whole situation, specifically regarding this plant and some other Scindapsus. I don't know what it is. It's always the Scindapsus that people are doing this with and then trying to sell it to you as a fully rooted plant, and it's just cuttings. But I have had to rescue several Scindapsus plants in the last few weeks that were basically done that way. They were potted up as a bunch of unrooted cuttings and then sold in a pot that was way too big at a big box store, and then they start getting root rot and dying. So I took it as an opportunity of, here's where we're gonna film an upcoming video for you guys to understand, because I just feel like that is taking advantage of you, the plant buyer, and it's gonna make you think that you have a black thumb, and you don't. Trust me, you don't. I firmly believe everybody has a green thumb. We just gotta find the right plants for your green thumb, right? But when you buy a plant and you don't know that you've already set up for failure, then you feel like a failure and you think you must have done something wrong. So we are going to do I'm very passionate. I'm sure you can tell how I'm talking about this. I'm very passionate about this topic. It really upsets me. And so that video will be coming out hopefully in the next few weeks. I've got to get some B-roll put together for it, but just be on the lookout for that. But this plant has been getting that done to it a lot lately. Not this specific one, but this type of plant. And it is just a shame, because it is just such a beautiful plant. We should have more of them in the world, and you're not going to have more of them in the world by doing what I just discussed, right? But if you can find one that actually is fully rooted, even if you have to pay a little more for it than what you will see them for at the big box stores, I would highly recommend doing so. It is a gorgeous plant. As you can see, these leaves have this kind of silvery sheen to them, and then down the middle, they've got that dark green kind of stripe. Very, very shiny. I don't use leaf shine or anything on any of my plants, you guys. This is just what the plant looks like. It just looks like this naturally. And then the new growth comes in a little bit lighter. You see that leaf up there at the top, that new one that's coming in up here? I can't see you guys. I can't even see where I'm pointing here. This leaf right here is the new one. So they do come in lighter, and this is typical of all Scindapsus. They're going to come in lighter, and then they're going to turn into that darker color. This is also another good low light tolerant plant. So if you have a place that is not as bright, but it still is going to want to get some indirect brighter light at some point. So you, like I said, sometimes it helps to have plants on rotation. So when you're getting plants for low light areas, think about where else you could put it and get another plant that's low light tolerant to put in that area, and then just swap them around every few months. That's a good thing to do if you want to keep those plants happy, but you still want to have plants in every single room if you're going for that total urban jungle vibe. So good low light tolerant plant. Also wants to dry out. Now, these, I did say at the start of this video, some of these plants don't want to dry all the way out. Scindapsus, I feel like, do not like to dry completely out. I think they want to dry almost all the way out. So I would say at least down till there's only about an inch, the bottom inch of soil is wet. So I kind of take it as if it feels dry, if it looks dry on top, if it feels like it's gotten lighter, like it's doesn't have as much water in it, then I look at the bottom down here. And if this is starting to look like it's getting a little bit lighter in color, like it's starting to dry out, then I'll go in and water it, unless I'm seeing signs up above on the top of the plant that it's dehydrated and needs water before that. So just keep that in mind with the Scindapsus, that I don't let them dry completely out. I do find that Scindapsus also prefer a little bit higher humidity, but once again, both of these have been here through the 30% humidity in the winter, and they're doing fine. I do think that repotting wise, you're pretty much in the same kind of boat as with the Epipremnums. once maybe every 1 to 2 to 3 years for repotting. Just look for the signs and symptoms. They will get root bound though, really badly root bound sometimes. So you want to make sure that you're kind of catching it and repotting it before it gets too root bound and it's just like a crazy root situation. And, you know, in that situation, if that happens, if they get crazy root bound, you still repot them. It's just kind of a pain. I feel like it takes them longer to figure out, like, their roots have gotten so wrapped up in each other. They'll find their way into the soil, but I feel like it takes a longer time when you've let it get too root bound, you know what I mean? But it will happen. It's just you're gonna see a slowdown in growth typically in that situation while it tries to work itself out. But yeah, just a great, pretty plant. I don't remember if I said this yet, but trailing as well. And you also can train it to grow up a pole. So once again, options there. And there are some other varieties as well of the treubii, and this is the Moonlight one. There's actually a dark form one that is like almost totally, it looks almost black. It's so dark. I would absolutely love to have one of those one day, but that one is really rare. So much, much harder to find. And I think much harder to grow. I think they take a longer time to grow. It's part of the reason when plants are rare, you guys, why you have a hard time finding them is because they typically are slower growers. And so it's harder for producers to produce a ton of them to flood the market with, which is what ends up making them easier to find and drives the prices down. But just know there are some other varieties of this one out there. So our last plant we're going to talk about is our Scindapsus pictus. So there are also a bunch of varieties of Scindapsus pictus. This one was labeled a silver splash when I bought it, you guys, but I really think that's a mislabel. I seriously, I asked the social media realm what they thought, and most people came back and said, yes, they thought it was a silver splash, but I don't. I think this is actually an Exotica, and I think it was just mislabeled. But maybe it's a silver splash. It's still relatively a juvenile plant. So as it gets more leaves and as the leaves it has become more mature, I might be able to have a better tell and read on if it actually is. But in the meantime, it's still just a beautiful plant and a good kind of example. And the Exotica that I was talking about does look very similar to this one to me, especially this one leaf. So and Exoticas typically are easier to find as well. So if you like the look of this leaf right here, so you can see dark green, and it's kind of hard to read in this light, you guys, but it's actually silver variegation. It's silvery variegation. Maybe you can see a little better up here. And so the leaves get pretty big on an Exotica, like this leaf is pretty big here. And there are other pictus varieties, such as the Silvery Ann, which have much smaller leaves, like a Silvery Ann. You can see this new leaf here, that size. That's kind of the size leaves that a Silvery Ann will have. So a little bit smaller if you want something that doesn't have quite as big leaves. Still a trailing plant, but you can still train it to go up a pole if you want. And just like on the other one, you can see those new leaves are coming in lighter colored. Exotica variety, the Silvery Ann, and the Argyrius, I can talk today. Argyrius varieties are the ones that you're typically going to find most often at your local stores. But easy care, once again, you're going to let it dry almost all the way out. Same situation as with this one, repotting once every 1 to 2, maybe 2 to 3 years. And it is fast growing, definitely going to be fast growing, definitely low light tolerant. So that is all the plants I have for you today, you guys. There are so many more out there, like I said, and so many more varieties of these types of plants. I just wanted to give you a basic idea. Hopefully you've jotted down some key notes like pothos. Even if you can't remember the Scindapsus and Epipremnum names, pothos in general is a good one. Hoyas, obviously, and then all the succulents, the Senecios if you want that trailing type like pearl. I'm really digging on pearl lately, you guys, in case you haven't noticed. But yeah, so, and any other questions that you guys may have, if none of these plants were really like, you weren't feeling the vibe, I can probably help you still find, well, I know I can help you still find another one. So if you want to comment down below and let me know what your vibe is and what kind of drought tolerant, easy care plant I can recommend for you, I will do so. You can also always reach out to me on Facebook or on Instagram at Aloha Plant Life. And if you have not yet clicked that like and subscribe button down below, please do so, you guys. And make sure you check out these other videos that I mentioned that I'm linking here for you and or in the description so that you can learn a little bit more about underwatering and watering care in general for your plant. Thanks for joining me again, you guys, and I will see you next time. Aloha!